If you really don't like your work and you also don't like your commute, then you are spending so much time of your life in a negative mood state.
A lot of people would hear, I've taken no days off in 10 years and think you're a workaholic and that's extreme and you need days off and all that sort of. But I think ironically, the average person who takes weekends is probably also still like stressed and tired and always consumed with work. But it seems like you're just stepping back and thinking, I can still do this. I can still do 3 hours of work and then still enjoy the rest of my time, and actually everything's better. So you don't run into burnout or feeling fatigued with work. It sounds like you load balance things sufficiently throughout the week.
Yes, and I think that the balance is key, and it's much more acute than I think a lot of people recognize, because feelings are very acute. So the whole ideal burnout and everything is something that's managed very much on momentary levels. You cannot prevent a burnout if you're chronically overworked, sleep deprived and everything by taking an extra holiday every year. That really doesn't cut it, because if you're in that being burned out situation at work and you need 3 months before your next holiday, it's not like every day of those 3 months you're like, in 3 months I'm going to Egypt. That doesn't help you at that moment in time. So actually I think you also enjoy, in that example of me going to Venice, I enjoy the tourist stuff much more when I know I've answered all my clients, there's nothing I need to do anymore. I'm done. And that is a very big benefit of not being self-employed, is that you can go home, at least for most jobs. Doesn't make you the best employee, but for most jobs, many people can go home and completely forget about everything. Often they don't, and that often leads to burnout. If you wake up, the first thing is your email from your work, for example. That's something you should not, unless it's really urgent, you're a doctor or something. But I think for most people, they divide their work hard, play hard, way too much across days or across overtime. And in large part, that's because of the limitations of modern society and working in offices and commutes and everything. But as a PT or an online PT, you're not restrained by those things. And you can plan your day however you like. You can sleep at daylight and work at night. You can do whatever you want. I think for most people, for online PTs or entrepreneurs, you want every day to have things that you really enjoy and things that probably you don't enjoy. I think every day because sleep acts like almost a full body reset button in many ways. Like not having utilized that productivity, like that morning productivity, for example, put you back one day. You're not going to catch up on that. Like, no way. You have a limited amount of actually productive time per day, especially for like more creative and intellectual work. If you don't use that day, you're not getting it back. Even if next week you planned to have more done, you have brainstorm sessions or whatever. It simply doesn't work that way. And likewise, if you one day, and I have some of those days, you really feel at the end of the day burned out, like there was too much, you should use that as a reflection moment, like, okay, this was my threshold. I should not have those kind of days frequently. Ideally, you're always pushing that threshold, but never really crossing over into that level where you feel like this was too much. And if your next day you do absolutely nothing, which is most people's idea of holiday, then you're not making that day feel any better. Because when you're experiencing that being overuse, you don't have any benefit from what's going to happen in the future. So I think you really have to balance things much more, like the yin and yang occur more on a single day than a week or a month.
I think the standard model of taking a day off assumes that working on a business is not an enjoyable thing or something that you would choose to do. This is something that Yusuf and I talk about a lot, that like we will, for like away on holiday with our girlfriends, we'll wake up early to do a few hours of work because we would like to do that. But people hear that and go, oh, that's too extreme. But it's so interesting just hearing you talk about it if you actually think about it, then taking a week of holiday followed by 2 months of pushing yourself to the limit and repeating that, you're never actually improving anything. You're just keeping your head above water the whole time.
Yeah, I think also for people that have a job, like you should be working on an exit plan. If you want to become an online PT, for example, you need to also have investment days for your online PT business. Like you need to be working towards that, because just willing it's not going to make it happen. And that's how people end up with a midlife crisis. When the moment they realize, like, I should have done this over the last 30 years, but I haven't, and now I'm stuck. And, that's not how you want to live your life.
Would you say that, just as general opinion, do you think that everybody should be working towards working for themselves? Based on that, it's very hard to live the life you've just described if Monday, 9 a.m., you need to be in an office working for somebody else.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And you need to have the luxury of being passionate about what you do something, because things change completely between intrinsically and extrinsically motivated things. If you do something that you would do anyway, like you're intrinsically motivated for it, you're just driven to do it from inside, then these things like creativity and everything, they apply. But for more extrinsically motivated work, like you do the work because you get a salary, and there's no way you would otherwise do these things. That's purely intrinsically motivated work. A lot of different rules apply. Like you need to be motivated more by deadlines. You probably have more to gain from being in other places, having set structures, etc. So also for individuals, there are some people I say, I've lived in 51 countries. In many times, I'm in a different country every month. They look at me like, oh my God, that's terrible. There's different individuals. A lot of people are like, oh, that's cool. And then there's people in the middle. They're like, oh, that sounds really great, but I could never do it. So if you're the person that, if I say that, and you're like, oh my God, that's absolutely terrible, then you're probably not the individual that would benefit from this in any way. Just like with being self-employed, some people, they don't have any passion, or like it's generally difficult to find your passion for a lot of people, or even to have hobbies these days. I think that's also something that's being displaced by Netflix and the like. So a lot of people simply are not even in this mind space. But I think anyone that is listening to this interview will be.
Yeah, you're right. It sounds like it's to do with risk appetite, and the same way you would advise someone on their investments. You might say, okay, small biotech stocks, great if you have a long time horizon, you're okay with blowing out your account, you're ready for a big upside. But you might have someone who is later on in their life, they need to provide for their kids and they can't afford a big blowout. Then they might value the security and the predictability at the expense of higher upside. Or if they lack a particular passion for something, or they just want to be able to turn up, switch off their brain, to do their work for 8 hours and then come home and spend time with their kids. So it's got to be different strokes for different folks. But certainly the people that reach out to us and the people that listen to this podcast have had some taste of that life, either in a gym or in a separate job, and thought, you know what, I'm not up for this. I have a passion for something else. I want to be able to contribute something that's my own business, and to be able to create my own brand from this. And for anyone listening as well, if you want to hear Menno's thoughts on personal branding and creating content and doing that side of things, then we had a chat with him last year on the podcast as well, which was extremely popular.
Yeah, that's a funny, profound story to this. I remember when I was a kid, I used to collect Warhammer. It's like miniatures, but cool. And they have these games workshops where you can buy all the miniatures and they play the games there, and they paint them and stuff. And I remember I used to think about, when I was thinking about my career and everything as a kid, what do I want to do later? And I had this moment where I thought about, what if you work in a games workshop? Like some of these guys are like 40, some 50 or so. And there was this one side of me that thought like, then you're a total bum. Like if you're 50 and you're still painting miniatures in Games Workshop. But there also was this other side of me that thought like, so these guys, they go to work. They have absolutely no stress. They get paid, not much, but they get paid enough to sustain themselves by just doing their hobby. Like they sit there all day. They have to help some customers, but they talk about their favorite game. They paint stuff and they play games, literally. That's how they get their money. So if you let go of the whole climbing the ladder perspective and everything, and realize that you also don't need that much money, then actually I think for a lot of people that is a pretty good scenario. Like
that's a cool example, because those guys are winning at life. If you love Warhammer and that's your thing, and you don't have an inherent need for status or salary or all these kind of things, then yeah, like you smashed it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely the different strokes for different people. If you've seen the movie Office Space, it's a similar scenario where it's a great movie. It's a comedy. There's like probably 10 good comedies in the world, if you ask me. That's one of them. And it's literally a must watch. It's pretty old now. I think the 90s, maybe even late 80s. But if you've ever worked in an office, that movie is an absolute must watch. And basically, one of the things that happens, spoiler alert, is that he decides he's sick with the office life, and all of the typical office life things happen to him and everything. All of the things that people can emphasize with, which sucks about working in an office. And he realizes that although he made much more money that way, at the end, again, spoiler alert, he starts working in construction with one of his mates, where he always used to think that guy has no life at all. He works in construction. But then he was like, yeah, actually, I like physical exercise. I'm outside all day. It's generally sunny in this region. I don't really need more money. And that's how he finds happiness. So there definitely are multiple ways. You have to be open to finding what works for you. But I think for most people listening here, you have a passion, and that's fitness. You want to make your work out of that. But even then, you could still do something. Like, I know that there are a lot of people that, for example, are lawyers or something, and they also want to become a PT, but they're struggling with the balance between career and everything. And I can say that for the vast majority of people, choosing passion, even if you don't make enough, like at least if you can cover basic needs and everything, choosing your passion make you happier in the end in life, for sure.
It's the irony of working in doing your hobby for a living is the sort of thing that people do when they retire. I've lived 60 years to earn this arbitrary sum of money so that I can then do something that I enjoy every day, but not liking 60 years is worth that trade-off. So yeah, we both used to work in finance and then made this transition. So I think it is a weird thing when you go from a world where all anybody talks about is like the annual increase in the annual gross salary, like not even the hourly rate or anything really meaningful, and that it'll all be better in 3 years' time when senior is put in front of my title or whatever. And then you leave that and you come into a world where none of that exists. It is a very strange comparison, but ultimately, like, whatever you don't really mind doing for a long period of time and enjoy, I think is always the thing that you're going to win at. It's quite hard to beat someone who just enjoys doing the thing that is also generating them an income and making an impact.
Such a good point about the annual gross salary as well, that if you plot it out and you've got the line of annual gross salary, which is climbing like this with number of years of seniority, but then if you were to overlay stress and then overlay like hourly rate and all these other things, I don't think hourly rate would go up in the same angle, for example, and stress would certainly climb. Yeah, it's a bit of and the only thing that you really have control over is how long you're in the job for and the kind of progression of gross salary. Yeah, it's a bit of a dodgy game to play.
Economists often talk about the hedonic treadmill when it comes to the difference between this money and happiness, or more generally, the difference between life satisfaction, which is more of an objective measure, like how much money you make, and actual subjective well-being, which is how you feel. And the analogy is that quite a lot of people are prone to getting stuck in like a hamster wheel, where they just keep running faster and faster, but in terms of happiness, they're not really going anywhere. So you can see that they make more money, they have more status and everything, but they don't really feel better. And if you think about happiness, which I think every human being should, there are not that many things that really affect your happiness, like in a profound way, like on day to day. Like when you're doing something and you really feel better than when you're doing something else. Like often the differences are quite subtle. A lot of the times, I think most people, and we generally shows, people generally feel somewhat neutral or like pleasant, overall happy, but not like baller or terrible. So I think if you really don't like your work and you also don't like your commute, then you are spending so much time of your life in a negative mood state. Like, how much happiness do you think you're going to get from money or whatever it is you're getting from your job to compensate for that? That's going to be very tough.
I remember in studying economics, like one of the diagrams that I always remember is, I think it's called the backward bender or the backward bending supply curve, where it plots hours versus wage. And there is this point where people start to prefer to lose money to acquire back more time. Obviously, everyone's willing to work longer hours if it means their wage is going up. But there is a point at which, actually, take the salary. I couldn't care less. I would just like an hour back, please. And like when you really, I suppose that's the sort of thing where, as you say, on this hedonic treadmill of like, if I just keep doing more activity to earn more money, then somehow, somewhere in the equation, I'll be happier. When actually, like, the data suggests not the case. It links back to what you were saying about there are only so many hours in the day, only so many hours in the week where you can produce something meaningful, and the rest of the time is probably better spent going to a waterfall or watching Netflix or whatever.
I've certainly felt at that point of the backward bend at 2 a.m. with my finger in someone's bum, just like this. I would pay someone to just take the rest of this night shift and let me go home.
That was literal.
Yeah, Yusuf's working as a doctor, Menno, I should probably clarify.
Oh yeah, that's true. I should out of context. That's a terrible statement. Yeah. We, as Johnny said, we used to work in investment bank and finance, and this hedonic treadmill was another thing that we saw in terms of expenditure. And this is, I think, a really dangerous one, because you'd see junior traders that are 24 years old driving cars that you're thinking there is no way on. Yes, you've got a big salary, but like that, you can't really afford that car. And so gearing up the expenses of the lifestyle to the point where they can't really quit their job because they miss a monthly payment on their mortgage or on their car payment or something, and the whole thing crashes down.